The emergency bunker smelled like fear and recycled air. Tommy pressed his small hands against the metal walls, counting the hours by the rhythm of his own heartbeat. 3 days had passed since the screaming stopped. 3 days since the explosions ended. 3 days since he heard his mother's voice calling his name before everything went silent. The 12-year-old boy sat in darkness, too afraid to activate the lights. The pirates might still be up there, searching through the ruins of his family's mining station. His father had shoved him into this hidden shelter when the first ships appeared on the horizon, their black hulls cutting through Talos 7's orange sky like knives through flesh. "Stay quiet, Tommy. No matter what you hear, stay quiet," his father had whispered, sealing the heavy door with his security code. That was the last time Tommy saw him alive. Now hunger gnawed at his stomach. The emergency rations were almost gone, and the water recycler made strange clicking sounds that meant it would fail soon. Tommy knew he had to leave the bunker, but terror kept him frozen in place. What if they were still out there? What if they were waiting? A low vibration traveled through the ground, different from the mining equipment he was used to. This felt deeper, more alive. Tommy crept to the small periscope his father had installed and slowly turned it toward the surface. The mining station lay in ruins. Twisted metal and scattered debris covered the ground where his home used to stand. Smoke still rose from several craters. But that was not what made his blood turn cold. Something massive moved between the wreckage. At first, Tommy thought it was another pirate ship, but this creature walked on 4 legs. Each step sent tremors through the earth. The thing was bigger than any building Tommy had ever seen, covered in scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 2 enormous eyes swept across the devastation, glowing with an intelligence that made Tommy's skin crawl. The Shadow Maw. Even a mining colony kid like Tommy knew the stories. Spacers whispered about it in bars across the galaxy. A predator older than most civilizations, strong enough to tear apart battleships with its bare claws. Every species in known space feared the creature that hunted between the stars. Tommy should have stayed hidden. Every instinct screamed at him to remain in the bunker until the monster left. But something else drove him forward. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the desperate loneliness of being the only person left alive on his world. Or maybe it was just the stubborn human trait that made his species do stupid things when they were scared. He opened the bunker door and climbed toward the surface. The devastation looked worse up close. Tommy recognized pieces of the laboratory, where his mother worked, the kitchen where they ate breakfast just 4 days ago, the workshop where his father taught him to repair mining drones. All of it was gone now, reduced to smoking metal and broken dreams. The Shadow Maw stood in the center of the destruction, its massive head turning slowly as it examined the ruins. Tommy had seen pictures in the archives, but they did not prepare him for the reality. The creature was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a living piece of the night sky. Its scales shifted between deep black and dark purple, and strange patterns glowed beneath its skin like veins of starlight. Tommy took another step forward. A piece of debris crunched under his foot, and the sound echoed across the wasteland, like a gunshot. The Shadow Maw's head snapped toward him, and those ancient eyes locked onto his small form. For a moment that felt like forever, boy and beast stared at each other across the ruins. Tommy expected to die. Everyone knew the Shadow Maw killed everything it encountered. No one had ever survived a meeting with the apex predator. But death did not come. Instead, the massive creature lowered its head until its eyes were level with Tommy's. The boy could feel its breath, warm and strangely sweet, washing over him in gentle waves. Up close, he could see that the patterns under its skin were not random. They formed shapes that almost looked like writing, like the star charts his parents used for navigation. The Shadow Maw made a sound deep in its throat, somewhere between a purr and a growl. Tommy felt the vibration in his bones. Then, impossibly, the creature began to lower itself further. Its front legs bent and its massive body sank toward the ground until the great predator was kneeling before the small human child. Tommy reached out with one shaking hand and touched the scales on the creature's snout. They felt warm and smooth, like polished stone that had been left in sunlight. The shadow maw closed its eyes and leaned into the touch, making that strange purring sound again. "You're not what they say you are," Tommy whispered. His voice was rough from crying, but the words felt important somehow. "You're not just a monster." The creature's eyes opened, and Tommy saw something that made his heart skip. Intelligence, yes, but also sadness. Ancient, bone-deep sadness that came from watching civilizations rise and fall, from being alone for longer than most species had existed. A new sound reached Tommy's ears. Ship engines approaching fast. He looked up to see a small fleet of vessels descending through the atmosphere. Salvage ships, drawn by the energy signatures of the destroyed mining station. In a few minutes, they would land and find him. Shadowmaw heard them too. It lifted its great head and made a different sound, one that Tommy felt more than heard. A deep, commanding note that seemed to shake the very air. The approaching ships suddenly changed course, their engines sputtering and failing. One by one, they crashed into the hills beyond the mining station, their crews probably unconscious before they hit the ground. Tommy stared at the wreckage, then back at the creature. "Did you just save me?" The Shadowmaw stood and walked to a nearby hill. With careful movements of its massive claws, it began to dig. Tommy watched as the creature unearthed something that had been buried deep underground. A ship, but not like any he had ever seen. It was grown rather than built, with curves and surfaces that seemed alive. Organic technology that merged metal and flesh into something new. The ship's side opened like a flower blooming, revealing an interior that glowed with soft blue light. The Shadowmaw looked back at Tommy and made that purring sound again. It was clearly waiting for something. Tommy understood. The creature was offering him a choice. He could wait here for another salvage crew to find him, probably to be sold into slavery or worse. Or he could trust the most feared predator in the galaxy and see where it would take him. The boy walked toward the ship, his small feet crunching on the debris of his old life. When he reached the Shadowmaw, he placed his hand on its scales again. "I guess we're partners now," he said. The creature's response rumbled through the ground like distant thunder, and somehow Tommy knew it was the sound of agreement. The holographic display flickered to life in the emergency session chamber, casting eerie blue light across the faces of the Galactic Council. 12 species had representatives in the circular room, but today they all wore the same expression, of disbelief and fear. Admiral Rex of the Reptilian Empire leaned forward in his chair, his scaled hands gripping the armrests until they creaked. "Play it again," he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems. The recording began for the 5th time. Shaky footage from a salvage drone showed the ruins of the Talos 7 mining station. The image quality was poor, but what it captured was unmistakable. A human child no more than 12 years old, standing before the legendary Shadowmaw. And then the impossible happened again. The apex predator, the creature that had haunted the nightmares of every spacefaring species for millennia, lowered itself in submission. Counselor Prime of the Silicon Collective processed the data through multiple analytical frameworks, each one returning the same impossible conclusion. "The behavioral pattern contradicts everything in our databases," the artificial being stated, its crystalline form pulsing with confused energy patterns. "The Shadowmaw has never shown submission to any life form. Its interaction protocols are limited to hunt, kill, and consume." "Maybe the recording is fake," suggested Ambassador Bloom of the Verdant Communes, her plant-like features rustling with nervous energy. "Some kind of propaganda created by the human colonies to make themselves seem more dangerous than they are." Admiral Rex slammed his fist on the table, causing several smaller delegates to jump. "I have run every authentication protocol we possess. The recording is real. That monster actually bowed to a human child." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the life support systems. Each delegate processed this information through the lens of their own species' fears and ambitions. The humans had always been considered a minor threat, a young species barely worth monitoring. They had decent technology and a tendency toward violence, but nothing that marked them as exceptional compared to the older galactic powers. This changed everything. Dr. Nova of the Silicon Collective began accessing historical databases, searching for any precedent. Her consciousness divided itself across multiple processing cores, analyzing thousands of years of galactic history in seconds. "There are legends," she announced, her synthetic voice carrying undertones of concern. "Ancient stories from species that existed before our current civilizations. They speak of a time when the Shadow Maws served as guardians to a race called the First Ones. Fairy tales." Rex growled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps not," Nova continued. "The First Ones supposedly possessed the ability to form bonds with predator species, creating partnerships that amplified the abilities of both. According to the legends, they served as caretakers of the galaxy until they vanished mysteriously. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. If humans possessed some trait that allowed them to bond with Shadow Maws, they could become the most dangerous species in known space overnight. A single Shadow Maw could destroy entire fleets. An army of them, guided by human intelligence, could reshape the galactic order. "We need that child," Rex stated, his military mind already calculating possibilities. "Dead or alive, but preferably alive for study. If we can understand how this bond works, we can either replicate it or destroy it. The corporate syndicate has already launched 3 hunter fleets," reported Merchant Prince Gold, his mechanical augmentations clicking as he spoke. "The bounty on the boy is worth more than most planets' annual budgets." Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Tommy was discovering that the Shadow Maw's ship was unlike anything humans had ever built. The walls were warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with life. Corridors reshaped themselves as he walked through them, creating paths that led exactly where he wanted to go. The ship anticipated his needs, providing food when he was hungry and creating comfortable sleeping spaces when he was tired. The Shadow Maw, who Tommy had decided to call Shadow, spent most of its time in a massive chamber at the ship's heart. The creature seemed to be connected to the vessel through organic cables that merged with its scales. When Tommy first saw this, he thought Shadow was trapped or injured. But the creature's contentment was obvious, and Tommy began to understand that the ship was not just a vehicle. It was part of Shadow, an extension of its body and mind. Communication with Shadow happened through dreams and shared images. When Tommy slept, his mind filled with visions of ancient worlds and forgotten civilizations. He saw the rise and fall of empires that existed long before humans learned to make fire. He witnessed wars that consumed entire star systems and peace, treaties signed between species that no longer existed. Through these dreams, Tommy learned that Shadow was not just one creature, but part of a collective consciousness. There were other Shadow Maws scattered across the galaxy, all connected through quantum entanglement that allowed them to share thoughts and experiences instantly. They were the last remnants of an ancient ecosystem, survivors from a time when the galaxy was young. The most important revelation came during Tommy's 4th night aboard the ship. In his dreams, he stood in a vast chamber surrounded by beings of pure light. The First Ones, Shadow called them through the dream connection. They were the species that had created the bond between Shadow Maws and their partners, establishing a symbiotic relationship that had maintained galactic stability for millions of years. "What happened to them?" Tommy asked in the dream. The light, beings pulsed with sadness. Images flowed through Tommy's mind showing the First One's gradual decline. They had not been destroyed by war or disease, but by their own success. As they perfected their civilization, they lost the very traits that allowed them to bond with the Shadow Maws. They became too civilized, too removed from the primal forces that governed the universe. Eventually, the First Ones transcended physical existence entirely, leaving their Shadow Maw partners behind to maintain the balance alone. For eons, the Shadow Maws had wandered the galaxy, searching for a species that possessed the right combination of intelligence and primitive instinct to restore the ancient partnership. They had tested hundreds of species over millions of years. All had failed. Too violent, too peaceful, too rigid, too chaotic. Each species either tried to dominate the shadow maws or feared them too much to form a true bond. Until now. Tommy woke from the dream with tears on his cheeks and a new understanding burning in his chest. The human species was not being chosen because they were superior. They were being chosen because they were the right combination of civilized and wild, smart enough to understand the responsibility, but young enough to accept it without question. As the ship traveled through hyperspace toward its next destination, Tommy felt the weight of his species' future settling on his young shoulders. He was no longer just a mining colony kid who had survived a pirate raid. He was the first human to form the ancient bond, the proof that his species could carry on the work of the first ones. And across the galaxy, fleets were mobilizing to stop him. The emergency broadcasts had reached every inhabited system by now. Some species saw opportunity in the partnership between human and shadow maw. Others saw only threat. Pirates and mercenaries launched from a dozen worlds, drawn by bounties that could buy entire fleets. Military commanders dusted off contingency plans for dealing with apex predators. Scientists worked frantically to understand the biological mechanisms that made the bond possible, but none of them truly understood what they were dealing with. Tommy was not just a boy with a dangerous pet. He was the herald of a new age, the first of his kind to inherit the role that the first ones had abandoned eons ago. The galaxy would tremble not from the roar of conquest, but from the quiet revolution that was about to begin. And it all started with a 12-year-old boy who refused to be afraid of the monster that everyone else feared. The hunt was beginning, but Tommy and Shadow were already 3 steps ahead. The war room aboard the battleship Crimson Fang buzzed with activity as Admiral Rex studied the tactical displays. Red dots marked the positions of hunter fleets across 3 sectors, all converging on the last known location of the human boy and his shadow maw. Each dot represented ships worth billions of credits and crews desperate enough to hunt the most feared predator in the galaxy. "Report," Rex commanded, his reptilian eyes fixed on the holographic star map. Commander Steele stepped forward, his mechanical implants whirring softly. 17 fleets have joined the hunt, sir. Corporate syndicate forces, mercenary groups, and 3 military expeditions from minor species. Total count is over 300 ships. And the target? Gone, sir. They jumped to hyperspace 6. Hours ago, long-range sensors detected energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. The ship appears to use some form of biological faster-than-light travel. Rex's claws scraped against the metal table. In his 40 years of military service, he had never encountered a problem that could not be solved with superior firepower. But the Shadow Maw was different. It was older than his entire civilization, and now it had a human partner with unknown capabilities. What about the psychic tracking teams? Inconclusive results, sir. The mind reader units report strange interference whenever they attempt to locate the boy. Some kind of mental static that hurts to experience directly. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Tommy was learning why the galaxy feared creatures, like Shadow. The ship had emerged from hyperspace near a small asteroid field, and Tommy watched through the organic viewing ports as Shadow hunted. The target was a pirate vessel that had been terrorizing merchant ships in this system for months. Tommy felt no sympathy for the crew. These were the same kind of people who had destroyed his home and killed his parents. But watching Shadow work was both fascinating and terrifying. The Shadow Maw did not attack the pirate ship directly. Instead, it released a cloud of microscopic organisms that drifted through space like cosmic dust. When the cloud reached the pirate vessel, the tiny creatures began to merge with the ship's hull, converting metal and plastic into organic matter. Within minutes, the pirate ship was no longer a machine. It had become part of Shadow, absorbed and digested at a molecular level. The crew never even had time to send a distress signal. "That's how you've been avoiding the hunter fleets," Tommy said, understanding flooding through him. "You don't run from them. You make them disappear." Shadow's response came as a series of images in Tommy's mind. The creature showed him memories of similar encounters over the millennia. Warships that had tried to hunt Shadow Maws simply vanished, leaving no debris and no survivors to report what they had seen. The galaxy's military forces had learned to avoid direct confrontation with the apex predators, not through victory, but through the complete absence of anyone who had ever engaged them successfully. But Tommy was changing that dynamic. Through their bond, Shadow was becoming something new. The creature's hunting instincts were being tempered by human morality and strategic thinking. Instead of simply consuming threats, they were learning to be selective about their targets. The education continued as they traveled from system to system. Shadow shared eons of accumulated knowledge through their neural link, teaching Tommy about galactic politics, ancient technologies, and the hidden connections between seemingly unrelated events. Tommy learned that the current galactic order was actually relatively young, built on the ruins of at least 6 previous civilizations that had destroyed themselves through war and environmental collapse. Each fallen civilization had made the same mistakes. They had prioritized conquest over cooperation, short-term profit over long-term sustainability, and military might over diplomatic wisdom. The Shadow Maws had watched it happen again and again, powerless to intervene without partners who could understand both the big picture and the small details that made civilization work. Tommy also discovered that he was changing too. His senses were becoming more acute, able to detect emotional states and biological patterns in ways that normal humans could not. When they encountered other ships, Tommy could feel the crew's intentions before they were expressed through words or actions. Fear felt different from aggression, which felt different from curiosity. More importantly, he was developing the ability to communicate with other Shadow Maws. During their 3rd week together, Shadow brought the ship to a remote system, where another creature waited among the frozen rings of a gas giant. This Shadow Maw was smaller than Shadow, with scales that shifted between silver and blue. Tommy felt nervous as he approached the second creature, but the bonding process was surprisingly gentle. The new Shadow Maw, whom Tommy decided to call Frost, accepted him immediately. Through their mental connection, Tommy understood that word of his partnership with Shadow had spread throughout the Shadow Maw collective. They were all watching to see if humans could truly fulfill the role that the first ones had abandoned. The test came sooner than expected. A distress signal reached them from a nearby system, where a passenger liner was under attack by 3 corporate syndicate warships. The liner carried refugees from a planet that had been strip-mined to exhaustion, families seeking new homes in the outer colonies. The syndicate ships wanted to capture the refugees for slave labor, a practice that was technically illegal but widely ignored by galactic authorities. Tommy felt the rage building in both Shadow Maws, but he also sensed their uncertainty. In the past, they would have simply destroyed all the ships involved, making no distinction between aggressor and victim. But Tommy's presence changed the equation. He could provide the moral guidance that allowed them to act with precision instead of overwhelming force. "Save the refugees," Tommy said, "but give the syndicate crews a chance to surrender." The attack was unlike anything recorded in military databases. Shadow's ship appeared in the middle of the battle without any of the usual energy signatures that announced a hyperspace arrival. The syndicate warships immediately opened fire, their weapons designed specifically for hunting apex predators. The weapons had no effect. Shadow's ship absorbed the energy and converted it into new organic systems that made the vessel larger and more powerful. When the first syndicate captain realized his attacks were only making the enemy stronger, he tried to retreat. Frost emerged from hyperspace directly in the path of the fleeing warship. But instead of destroying it, the Shadow Maw used targeted biological weapons to disable the ship's engines and weapons while leaving life support intact. The crew found themselves trapped but alive, drifting helplessly in space. The other 2 syndicate ships received the same treatment. Their crews watched in terror as their vessels were systematically disabled by creatures that could have easily destroyed them. When the battle ended, 300 refugees were safe, and 90 syndicate personnel were prisoners of war. Tommy broadcast a message to all 3 disabled ships. His young voice carried clearly through the communication channels, but there was something in his tone that made experienced military officers pay attention. "This is Tommy, speaking for the Shadow Maws. Your crews will be taken to the nearest corporate syndicate outpost and released unharmed. But carry this message back to your commanders. The hunt for me ends now. Anyone who attacks innocent people while trying to find me will face the same consequences as these ships. We are not hiding from you anymore. We are protecting the people you prey on." The message was transmitted across the galaxy within hours. Some dismissed it as the empty threat of a frightened child, but others noted the technical specifications of what the Shadow Maws had accomplished. Disabling military vessels without destroying them required precision and restraint that contradicted everything they thought they knew about apex predators. More importantly, the boy had demonstrated something that terrified the established powers more than raw destructive force. He had shown mercy tempered with strength, the combination that made true leaders rather than simple conquerors. Admiral Rex received the recording while his fleet was still searching for traces of Shadow's ship. He watched it 3 times, analyzing every word and gesture for clues about the boy's psychological state. "He's not running anymore," Commander Steele observed. "The tactical situation has changed." Rex nodded slowly. The hunt had become something more dangerous than a simple search and destroy mission. They were no longer pursuing a frightened child with a dangerous pet. They were facing the emergence of a new power that combined the ancient strength of the Shadow Maws with human innovation and moral complexity. "Send a message to all hunter fleets," Rex commanded. "New rules of engagement. Capture only. No weapons fire except in self-defense. If this boy can truly control the Shadow Maws, then killing him could turn every apex predator in the galaxy against us." But it was already too late for caution. The partnership between Tommy and the Shadow Maws was evolving faster than anyone could have predicted. And across the galaxy, other members of both species were beginning to seek each other out. Drawn by the success of the first bonding, the revolution had begun. The docking bay of Nexus Station had never hosted a visitor like this one. Tommy stood on the bridge of Shadow's bioship, watching through organic viewing ports as the massive space habitat grew larger ahead of them. The station was a marvel of engineering, large enough to house 50 million beings from across the galaxy. Its rotating sections created artificial gravity for dozens of different species, while its central core served as the seat of galactic government. Today, that government was about to face something it had never encountered before. "Are you ready for this?" Tommy asked Shadow through their mental link. The boy was 13 now, taller than when they had first met, but still small compared to the galactic leaders who awaited him. His clothes were simple, practical garments that the ship had grown for him, but he wore them with a confidence that had not existed a year ago. Shadow's response came as a wave of calm determination. The ancient creature had waited millennia for this moment, when a bonded partner would finally challenge the cycle of rise and fall that had consumed civilization after civilization. Through their connection, Tommy felt the presence of 17 other Shadow Maws positioned throughout the system, each one partnered with a human who had answered the call. The docking process should have been impossible. Shadow's ship was larger than anything the station was designed to accommodate, and its biological nature defied standard safety protocols. But the vessel simply flowed into the docking bay like liquid, reshaping itself to fit the available space while maintaining its internal structure. Station security surrounded the ship with weapons drawn, but they kept their distance. Everyone had heard the stories by now. Entire hunter fleets had vanished while pursuing the boy and his Shadow Maw. Military vessels had been disabled with surgical precision. The old rules of engagement no longer applied when facing creatures that could rewrite the fundamental laws of technology through biological manipulation. Tommy walked down the ship's ramp with 3 smaller Shadow Maws flanking him. These were Shadow's offspring. Creatures the size of large dogs but with the same intelligence and bonding capability as their parent. They moved with fluid grace, their scales rippling with patterns that seemed to hypnotize anyone who looked at them directly. The crowd that had gathered in the docking bay parted as Tommy approached. Merchants, diplomats, tourists, and workers from 100 different worlds stepped aside, driven by an instinct older than civilization. Some bowed their heads in respect. Others simply stared in fascination at the human boy who had tamed the apex predators. But most felt fear. Deep, primal fear that reached into the genetic memory of every species that had ever been hunted by something larger and more dangerous than themselves. Tommy's escort through the station was an experience in controlled chaos. Security forces maintained a safe distance while news crews captured every step. The boy walked calmly through corridors designed to showcase the wealth and power of the galactic elite, but his presence transformed the familiar spaces into something alien and unsettling. The Grand Assembly Chamber was packed beyond capacity. Representatives from every major species had gathered to witness this unprecedented event. The circular chamber, with its tiers of seating rising toward a domed ceiling, had been the site of countless political debates and diplomatic negotiations. But it had never hosted a session quite like this one. Admiral Rex occupied his usual position in the Reptilian Empire's section, his military decorations catching the light as he leaned forward to get a better view of the boy. Across the chamber, Dr. Nova of the Silicon Collective processed the scene through multiple analytical frameworks, her crystalline form pulsing with confused energy patterns. Tommy walked to the center of the chamber, where speakers traditionally addressed the assembly. The three young shadow maws arranged themselves around him, their presence turning the boy into the focal point of a formation that looked both protective and ceremonial. "Distinguished delegates," Tommy began, his young voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I am Tommy, and I speak for humanity's partnership with the Shadow Maws. I have come here today not to negotiate or to ask for recognition, but to inform you of the changes that are already taking place across the galaxy." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. This was not the tone they had expected from a 13-year-old boy, regardless of his unusual circumstances. "For millions of years, this galaxy has followed the same pattern," Tommy continued. "Species rise to power through conquest and technology. They build empires, exploit resources, and dominate those weaker than themselves. Eventually, they destroy themselves through war, environmental collapse, or social decay. Then new species rise from the ruins to repeat the same mistakes." Ambassador Bloom of the Verdant Communes rustled her leaves in agitation. "You speak of things beyond your understanding, child. The galactic order has brought peace and prosperity to trillions of beings." Tommy's response was gentle but unyielding. "Has it? In the past year, I have witnessed slave raids, resource wars, and the systematic oppression of developing species. Your peace is built on the suffering of those too weak to resist. Your prosperity comes from stripping worlds bare and abandoning the populations to starvation." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted denials and accusations, their carefully maintained diplomatic facades cracking under the pressure of uncomfortable truths. But Tommy stood quietly in the center of the chaos, his young Shadow Maw companions alert and ready. Admiral Rex rose from his seat, his authority cutting through the noise. "Enough," he commanded. "The boy makes serious accusations. Let him present his evidence before we respond." "Thank you, Admiral," Tommy said with a respect that surprised the military commander. "But I am not here to present evidence. I am here to announce a choice." The chamber fell silent again, waiting for him to continue. "The Shadow Maws have decided that the current galactic order cannot be reformed. It must be replaced. Humanity has been chosen as their partners in this transformation, not because we are superior to other species, but because we are young enough to learn from the mistakes of those who came before us." Counselor Prime of the Silicon Collective processed this statement through multiple threat assessment algorithms. "Are you declaring war on the Galactic Council?" "No," Tommy replied. "War is the old way, the pattern that has failed every civilization that tried it. We are offering something different. Partnership instead of conquest. Cooperation instead of competition. Sustainability instead of exploitation." "Pretty words from a child with no understanding of reality," Rex growled. "You cannot reshape galactic civilization through good intentions." Tommy smiled, and for a moment he looked like the young boy he still was. "You're right, Admiral. Good intentions are not enough. But good intentions backed by the power to enforce them, that changes everything." He raised his hand and every electronic device in the chamber suddenly went silent. The lights dimmed, the holographic displays flickered out, and the environmental controls stopped their constant humming. Even the cybernetic implants of several delegates ceased to function normally. "This is what partnership with the Shadow Maws means," Tommy explained as panicked voices rose around him. "Technology becomes biology, Machines become living systems that can be influenced, modified, or controlled by those who understand the deeper connections between all forms of life. Admiral Rex reached for his sidearm, but the weapon would not respond to his touch. Across the chamber, security forces found their equipment equally unresponsive. The Shadow Maw's influence had spread through the station's systems like a benign virus, taking control without causing damage. "You're threatening us," Rex stated, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I'm demonstrating our capabilities," Tommy corrected. "If we wanted to threaten you, Admiral, your fleet would have ceased to exist the moment you entered this system. Instead, your ships are intact and your crews are unharmed. That should tell you something about our intentions." Dr. Nova's analytical processes finally reached a conclusion that her logical systems had been resisting. "You're not here to negotiate terms for coexistence. You're here to announce our replacement." "The choice is yours," Tommy said, addressing the entire assembly. "You can work with us to build something better than what exists now, or you can resist and watch your civilizations collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. But the change is happening regardless of your decision." He gestured toward the viewing ports that ringed the chamber. Through the transparent aluminum, the assembled delegates could see something that made their blood run cold. 17 Shadow Maw bioships had appeared around Nexus Station, each one crewed by human partners. The vessels were beautiful and terrifying, at the same time their organic curves suggesting both growth and predation. "My friends out there represent just the beginning," Tommy continued. "Across the galaxy, more humans and Shadow Maws are finding each other. Within a generation there will be thousands of partnerships. Within a century we will outnumber every military force currently in existence." The implications settled over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. The boy was not making empty threats or impossible boasts. He was describing an inevitable future based on biological and mathematical realities that no amount of military force could prevent. "What do you want from us?" Ambassador Bloom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommy's expression softened, showing his youth once again. "Learn, change, grow. Admit that the old ways have failed and be willing to try something new. Help us build a galaxy where strength serves wisdom instead of greed, where technology enhances life instead of destroying it, where different species work together instead of competing for dominance." The chamber remained silent as hundreds of delegates processed what they had heard. Some were already calculating the political implications of alignment with this new power. Others were planning resistance strategies that would probably prove futile. A few were beginning to understand that they were witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. Tommy waited patiently for their responses, knowing that fear and pride would make many of them choose poorly. But he also knew that some would make the right choice, and that would be enough to begin the transformation. The coronation was complete, not through conquest or ceremony, but through the simple demonstration of power tempered by wisdom. The galaxy had a new king, whether it acknowledged him or not. The merchant vessel drifted helplessly in space, its engines dead and its crew huddled in the cargo bay. Captain Mills had seen many strange things during his 40 years of hauling freight between the outer colonies, but nothing had prepared him for this. 3 pirate ships had been closing in for the kill when the bioship appeared, its organic hull gleaming like wet obsidian against the stars. The pirates were gone now. Not destroyed, but transformed. Their ships had been absorbed into the Shadow Maw's vessel, converted from metal and plastic into living tissue that pulsed with alien intelligence. The crews had been ejected in escape pods, left to drift until patrol ships could collect them for transport to rehabilitation centers. A young woman emerged from the bioship, floating through space in a protective membrane that surrounded her like a second skin. She looked to be in her early 20s, with the confident bearing of someone who had never doubted her place in the universe. Behind her came a Shadow Maw the size of a shuttle, its scales shifting between deep blue and silver as it moved. "Captain Mills," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the ship's communication system despite the vacuum between them. "I am Lisa, and this is my partner Storm. We received your distress signal." Mills had heard the reports, but seeing it firsthand was different. The partnership between humans and Shadow Maws had spread across the galaxy in the 2 years since the boy Tommy had confronted the Galactic Council. What had started as an impossible anomaly had become the new reality. "Thank you," Mills managed, his voice hoarse with relief. "Those pirates have been hunting merchant ships in this sector for months. The authorities said they were too busy to investigate." Lisa's expression darkened. "The old authorities are no longer relevant in many systems. We are the new peacekeepers here." She gestured, and Storm approached the merchant vessel with careful precision. Organic tendrils extended from the Shadow Maw's body, interfacing with the ship's power systems. Within minutes, the engines hummed back to life, and the life support systems returned to full capacity. "Your cargo manifest shows medical supplies, bound for the Kepler colonies," Lisa noted, accessing the ship's computer through Storm's biological interface. "Those supplies are critically needed. We will escort you to your destination." This had become the pattern across the galaxy. Human Shadow Maw partnerships appeared wherever the old order had failed to maintain justice or stability. They did not conquer territories or establish formal governments. Instead, they simply made themselves available to help when traditional authorities proved inadequate. The transformation had not been violent, but it had been comprehensive. Within 6 months of Tommy's address to the Galactic Council, over 300 human Shadow Maw partnerships had formed. The process was not random. The Shadow Maws seemed to choose humans based on criteria that scientists were still trying to understand, but the common factors appeared to be adaptability, moral courage, and a willingness to accept responsibility for others. Each partnership was unique. Some focused on exploration, pushing into regions of space that had been too dangerous for conventional vessels. Others specialized in disaster relief, using their bioship's ability to rapidly adapt and evolve to provide aid in extreme environments. Still others served as mediators in conflicts that had seemed impossible to resolve. The old powers had tried to resist at first. Admiral Rex had led a coalition fleet against one of the early human Shadow Maw settlements, confident that superior numbers and firepower would prove decisive. The battle had lasted exactly 17 minutes. Not a single coalition ship had been destroyed, but all of them had been disabled so thoroughly that they required complete reconstruction. More importantly, the engagement had been broadcast live across the galaxy. Viewers watched as the human partners offered repeated opportunities for surrender, used minimal force to disable rather than destroy, and provided immediate medical assistance to injured coalition personnel. The contrast with traditional military doctrine was stark and deliberate. Rex himself had been captured and brought before Tommy, who was now 14 and serving as the unofficial leader of the Human Shadow Maw Alliance. The boy had offered the Admiral a choice: continue fighting a war that could not be won, or help design a new system that served everyone's interests better than the old one. To everyone's surprise, Rex had chosen cooperation. His military expertise, combined with human innovation and Shadow Maw capabilities, had proven invaluable in establishing the security protocols that protected the new settlements. Dr. Nova of the Silicon Collective had undergone a similar conversion. Her analytical abilities, enhanced by partnership with a Shadow Maw that specialized in information processing, had helped create the communication networks that allowed the Alliance to coordinate across galactic distances without relying on traditional hyperspace relays. Not every species had adapted well to the changes. The corporate syndicate had fragmented into smaller organizations, some of which embraced the new cooperative model, while others retreated to the galactic rim where they continued their exploitative practices on a reduced scale. Several minor species had simply withdrawn from galactic affairs entirely, choosing isolation over adaptation. But for every group that resisted, 2 more requested partnership or protection from the Human Shadow Maw Alliance. The benefits were simply too obvious to ignore. Crime rates plummeted in protected systems. Environmental restoration projects that had seemed impossible became routine. Conflicts that had simmered for generations were resolved through mediation techniques that combined human psychology with Shadow Maw empathy. Tommy stood on the observation deck of his bioship, now called the Harmony, watching the construction of the first truly integrated colony. The settlement on the planet Haven was home to representatives from 43 different species, all working together on projects that would have been unthinkable under the old system. The buildings were grown rather than built, shaped by Shadow Maw, biotechnology to perfectly match the needs of their diverse inhabitants. Atmospheric processors maintained perfect environmental conditions for multiple types of biology simultaneously. The city was beautiful, functional, and sustainable in ways that traditional architecture could never achieve. "It's working," Tommy said to Shadow, who remained his constant companion and partner. The ancient creature had grown during their time together, not just in size but in complexity. Their bond had evolved beyond simple communication into something that resembled true symbiosis. Shadow's response came as a warm pulse of agreement mixed with caution. The Shadowmaw shared images of previous civilizations that had shown similar promise before succumbing to the same old patterns of greed and violence. The transformation was progressing faster than anyone had expected, but permanence was not guaranteed. "I know," Tommy acknowledged. "We have to stay vigilant. Success can be as dangerous as failure if it makes us overconfident." The boy was no longer just speaking for himself. Through the quantum entanglement that connected all Shadowmaws, his thoughts and decisions influenced every partnership across the galaxy. It was a responsibility that would have crushed most adults, but Tommy had been shaped by his experiences in ways that made him uniquely suited for the role. A communication alert drew his attention to an incoming message from the deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors had detected something approaching from outside the galaxy. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, but the pattern suggested intelligence and technology far beyond current galactic capabilities. "The real test," Tommy murmured, studying the sensor data. The galaxy had been so focused on its internal conflicts that it had never seriously considered the possibility of external threats. Now something was coming that would require every species to work together if they hoped to survive. He opened a communication channel to all human Shadowmaw partnerships simultaneously. "Everyone, this is Tommy. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Unknown contacts approaching from extragalactic space. All partnerships are to prepare for potential first contact scenarios. This is not a drill." The response was immediate. Across hundreds of star systems, human Shadowmaw teams began mobilizing. Bioships that had been engaged in peaceful construction projects suddenly shifted into configurations designed for deep space exploration and potential conflict. The transformation was smooth and coordinated, demonstrating the efficiency that had made the alliance so successful. But as Tommy coordinated the response, he felt a deeper satisfaction. 2 years ago, news of an external threat would have sent the galaxy into panic. Different species would have retreated to their own territories, hoarding resources and preparing for individual survival. The stronger powers would have tried to use the crisis to eliminate their rivals. Now, the reaction was completely different. Within hours, representatives from dozens of species were volunteering to join the response effort. Even former enemies were setting aside their differences to face the unknown together. The old corporate syndicate remnants offered their industrial capabilities. The Reptilian Empire provided military expertise. The Silicon Collective contributed their analytical abilities. For the first time in galactic history, every inhabited world was working toward the same goal. The approaching ships made contact 3 days later. The beings inside called themselves the Builders, and they had been traveling between galaxies for millions of years, seeking civilizations that had achieved true cooperation across species boundaries. Most galaxies never reached that level of development before destroying themselves. The Builders had come not as conquerors but as teachers. They offered knowledge that could transform the human Shadowmaw alliance into something even greater. Techniques for biological and technological integration that could spread life throughout the universe instead of just preserving it within a single galaxy. Tommy listened to their offer with the wisdom of someone who had seen both the best and worst of what intelligence could achieve. The Builders' knowledge was tempting, but it came with the same risks that had destroyed countless civilizations. Power without wisdom, technology without restraint, growth without purpose. "We are honored by your offer," Tommy replied during the formal first contact ceremony. "But we have learned that the most important advances cannot be given as gifts. They must be earned through experience and growth. We would welcome you as teachers and friends, but we will not accept shortcuts that could undermine what we have built. The lead builder, a creature of crystalline energy that shifted between multiple dimensional states, expressed something that might have been approval. You have learned the most important lesson. Perhaps this galaxy will finally break the cycle that has claimed so many others. As the ceremony concluded and the builders departed to establish a permanent embassy, Tommy reflected on how far they had all come. The frightened 12-year-old boy hiding in a bunker seemed like someone from another lifetime, though only 3 years had passed. The galaxy was still trembling, but no longer from fear. It trembled with the excitement of new possibilities, the energy of different species working together, and the promise of a future that would be better than anything that had come before. And at the center of it all, a young human and his ancient Shadowmaw partner continued their work of proving that cooperation was stronger than conquest, that wisdom was more powerful than weapons, and that sometimes the smallest person could change everything.